pale horse. The man who sat on him was death, and hell followed with him.
You're killing me, man.
Hello and welcome to Declarations of War. We are your hosts, Alexei of Card, Andy Astronaut,
Going?
Artemis Albosa,
Howdy, howdy.
and our very special guest for the show, Eve YouTuber and Small Gang PvP FC, Auraus Porcaleus.
Hello, everyone.
And I give myself bonus points for correct pronouncing that name.
Except for the first part, right?
Right. That no one would have otherwise heard. Thanks, Artemis.
What are you talking about? It is very clearly Oris.
It's like Norris, the Chinese guy.
Or Chuck, you know? Chuck Norris?
Norris, yeah. Dude,
I'm putting a 10 million bounty on Artemis's head if anyone wants to come claim that later today.
Good luck, I don't log in.
When I filmed my last commentary video, I probably spent at least 4 hours doing so many takes I couldn't get it down, and it was the most frustrating thing in the world.
And you see, this is why you have good content, and this is why we have declarations of war.
This is also why we call you AP instead of saying your name.
Right.
Yeah, I made the account when I was in middle school, and I just finished watching reading a Midsummer's Night Dream, so I was on this like mythology binge, and I was like, these sound very cool. This is how I'm going to spell it, and this is what I came up with.
Well, it's pretty cool. Gives you kind of a fancy sounding name. Before we get into interviewing AP, I just want to give a quick plug for Noir recruitment. We are looking for more folks for Noir, our Academy, Noir Academy, and our Alliance, the network. If you're interested, join cafenoir.ingame, and you'll have a link to our Discord, plus some people you can talk to. We're looking for anyone that's interested in joining the mercenary PvP lifestyle. It's one of the coolest aspects of EVE content that's very rarely explored by folks that play. So if you like PvP, you like the idea of PvPing professionally, mercenary content is the way to do it, and we are your number one stop for that content. So go join Noir, talk to your corp, think about joining the network. We are growing, and we're having a good time, and we're making it work in 2021. We're bringing EVE mercenary gameplay back from the dead. Okay, Auraus. Talk to us a little bit about how you got started in EVE. You're a badass now, but what brought you into the game initially, and what did you first do when you got here?
So I was quite young when I began to play EVE. I remember the advertisement specifically. It was on a website called theawesomer.com. And when I had just learned about I read about this EVE universe and how in-depth it was, and it seemed very, very cool to me. So I made a character. At first, not the one I currently play on, not my current main. And I did missions, I did everything. And this is very, very long ago. This is about almost a decade ago. And played the game. I think I lost everything in a catalyst. And then out to a gate camp in Losec when I was trying to do missions or whatever. I could probably find the kill mail. But then I would come back later after a rage quit, a typical 13-year-old rage quit, when I made the account that I have today. But with regards to getting into small gang and solo PvP, I used faction warfare as my sort of entrance into fighting other players, fighting around the Calente Caldari war zone. I would join a few corps around there, and after some faction warfare experience, the corporation I was in would be taken into Exodus Alliance, or the Alliance, I should say, Exodus, and these were Losec small gang, a Losec-oriented small gang group, basically. And this is when I really began to take off, because there were very talented players in the Alliance who had many things to share, and they taught me essentially much of what I know today. And from then, I went on to groups like Volta, Virgin Collapse, Volta, back to Exodus, and then did some, I guess, solo stuff in Losec for a while with some friends, and then to Goran, and then to where I am now.
It's kind of a who's who resume of PvP corps. What do you think is the most valuable thing you learned from joining all of them? What do all those successful organizations have in common?
I haven't learned it yet, but certainly working with others, that's been an experience as I've gone through groups, and something I'm improving on and learning from each group that I'm in.
What excited you about solo and small gang?
I like how much of an impact you have, and you make decisions autonomously in solo and small gang. It also picks your brain, because not only is every fight different, but there are so many different ways. EVE is a very complex game, as we all know, and if you have with every bit of theory crafting that you do to make your ship, make your gang, play with others, there become so many different ways to win fights. And when you're able to sort of navigate that and make the right decisions, and not only theory craft not correctly, but theory craft well, make strategies, form strategies very, very well, and then execute well. And then when you're able to get that into footage and either share with the community or cherish in a battle report, that's something that I always enjoy. That sort of the difference you have in the expression of skill and the hard work you put into it all.
Well, in addition to, seeing that come to fruition for yourself, a big part of your EVE career has been sharing that experience with other players, mostly through your YouTube channel, but also as a streamer. What got you started on that path? When did you first realize, like, hey, I've got this video editing skill, I'm going to put that to use, I'm going to make this channel, I'm going to put myself out there and live stream my roams and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I certainly didn't wake up one day and have decide to apply a video editing skill to EVE. It certainly was a gradual process, and I think that's evident if you're able to watch some of my old videos and look at the videos that I've put out recently. They've also sort of followed a YouTube trend of getting a bit shorter. So I cut down a lot on the footage that I record and only put in the good moments, or I take out a lot of the downtime in many of my fights. So the video editing process, at least that skill, is something that has come to me and I've developed over the years. I certainly didn't wake up with that. With regards to streaming, though, I feel as though that we almost went through a dark times, like the dark ages of small gang, where for a period of time, I think around 2016 to 2018, there wasn't a whole lot of small gang content. There was very, very few. And it was very, very hard to find it on YouTube. And now we see so much content. So it was during that time where I decided that I didn't necessarily want to become a streaming personality or, garner a community or become an entertainer for the source of, become a streamer for the source of entertaining. I just wanted to be someone who shared their gameplay with others and, a resource for players to ask questions, because sort of, my approach to solo PvP and getting better at PvP, or really anything in life or in general, is that you can either go through it alone. Like, many players say, just buy 10 frigates, go out and lose all 10 and learn 10 new things. But if I, as a player, can show you those lessons and those things applied beforehand, you don't have to do it on your own. You can take that information and use it and apply it on your next roam.
So one question I had there, just talking about your YouTube channel, can you give people an idea of how much, like, percentage-wise of your fights actually make it into videos versus how much you're just out fighting people and it just doesn't make for good YouTube content? Because I think that's something that's probably underappreciated.
Sure. When you say that, do you mean the total time and duration recording elapsed? Or do you mean, like, if I have 10 fights, how many of those 10 fights that I recorded that are in my folder recordings, how many of those make it to the YouTube channel?
Probably that second one. Like, out of all the fights you get, how many do you think are YouTube worthy?
I think I'm very fortunate and in some ways lucky that around probably 70 to 80% of them get into the YouTube channel. But I think that is also in part, I make the decision to record, right? So in terms of all the engagements, I should have probably just given you this answer. It's probably close to 40 to 50%, because I don't always press record. Like, when I'm fighting in EVE, I'm sort of thinking, okay, are people going to enjoy this? Is this going to be a good fight? And you get a feeling for that after you have so much experience. And I make the decision in order to record, right? And so some fights I don't record because, well, this is just a one-sided fight, or it's not very interesting. And other fights I certainly do press record, and the ones I do tend to find themselves on the YouTube channel. But I would definitely say even 50% around or so, like anywhere from 40 to 60%.
And that's a decision you make in the moment when you're flying around, or do you sort of go out with the intention of finding a recordable fight?
That's definitely something I make. I do streams, so I can go back and grab my VOD from Twitch, or I can use OBS to record. But the way I record, I make the decision to record. I don't have a buffer or anything going on. I don't save a buffer and crop it later. I make the decision to record. So I'm definitely out getting whatever fights I can get. And when I do get one that I think, oh, this is going to be a really good fight, then I'll press record, and that'll typically find its way into the videos.
Walk us through a bit of the video production process. How much time goes into it? Do you have anyone that helps you with it? When and how do you think about doing the commentary elements for the videos?
So this is one thing that I've been improving on and asking for feedback in terms of the commentary videos. The video editing process is a lengthy one for me, but it's also one that's very, very flexible. Typically what occurs is I will develop a music cache. I have a little folder on my PC with music that I intend to make videos on. And typically I either go through editing phases or sampling phases where I will either edit videos or sample music, and I sort of get a feel, or I have a vision. I know that sounds really weird to say, but I can envision what I want the video to be in my mind when I listen to a set of music. And music also has elements that enhance like the viewing experience, like maybe cuts to silence or crescendos or key changes. And so there are moments in those songs where I think, okay, this is going to be a good video transition, or this is what the moment this is what I can put in at this point in the song to give it dramatic effect. But apart from that, as a whole, I will take all of my footage and I have it in a project essentially, and I have different bins for different videos. But sequencing is the first part of making a video, where you cut and edit the footage. The first thing I will do is I will standardize all of my clips onto a timeline at around twice the speed, and it's variable. Sometimes it's 180, sometimes it's 215% speed. But I will sequence all of those at 200, and I will sort of piece them together and puzzle them with songs, right? With music on a different track, and see where they line up. I try and line up the video transitions and music transitions at the same time. So in this regard, I'm making a bulk of, and now that my videos have gotten shorter, it's become much easier because I can take footage from one sort of portion. Here, the viewers won't see it, but I can share it after the show. But sequencing is the first part, and that's when you arrange the clips and you arrange the music. And the third part is you edit all the small things. So transitions. I might do an intro if I feel the song warrants it, and then lastly is just exporting. And I've been adding like fight trackers, is what Prometheus Exenthal called them. The where you see what targets are currently on grid and what targets you've killed, and so that's another part of sort of adding the little things. I'll go back and I'll add filters to up the contrast, because people love. I think Eve without contrast is pretty dull to look at, so that really enhances the viewer experience. But I'll go ahead and stop talking. Did I answer that pretty well?
Yeah, I love the amount of detail there. Go ahead, Artemis.
A quick question about your UI. Your choice of blue for all of the enemies, is that like you just enjoy shooting blues, or is that a contrast thing? Is it easier for you to see them in space? Because like they're all blue.
It is indeed a contrast thing. So I got this idea from God's Apples, very old player who I began to play with and has since not played much anymore. But I noticed that on his overview, there were blues as well, and it is a contrast thing. So blue is the color I think that is most easily recognizable. And whenever something comes onto field with that blue color, you see it, no matter what nebula you're in space. Because some regions like the Minotaur space are very red. So if you have reds, you may not see it. I'm not colorblind or anything. This is just a very soothing color for me to look at. It doesn't strain my eyes like a yellow or a gray. For that reason, blue shows the white text that Eve shows up in very, very well. It also contrasts with yellow and red, which are the target icons, the boxes, so to speak, right? When someone yellow boxes you or red boxes you. If my color was red, for example, I wouldn't see if someone was red boxing me very well. I would have to see them. The way my overview works, I wouldn't see them, right. There isn't a enhanced element of contrast with those colors. And the same thing with gray is that it's very difficult, at least for me, to read white text on a gray background, or even colorless. I've tried colorless. I've tried many things. And the blue is just this soothing color that made sense to me because it's something I've gotten used to. I get that comment so much, like, "Oh, why are you shooting blues?" And in some
I figured it
degrees,
was
I
a
roll my eyes,
trolley
but
thing.
no, not at all. It was something that just enhanced my at least situational awareness on grid. Because when
So
something lands on grid, you see it.
What are your friendlies colored?
My fleet members are colored purple, and I will see them on some of my overview tabs for players that are blue to me with standings, for which there are very few. They will not show up on the overview, but in space they will show up as that dark blue color because, dark blue, light blue, doesn't matter. It's blue, right? You know what I mean? That's one thing I have struggled to sort of grasp is that there's a good standing and excellent standing. Doesn't matter. Blue is blue. So I colored them the same. And people might say, "Oh, but what if the blue shoots you?" If they shoot me, the hierarchy lists on my overview, it will show up on the overview. Like they'll get limited engagement or something, and they'll show up on the overview then.
Oh, that's super neat.
I do have a quick question about your ship of choice, or the ships that you choose to fly. I never noticed it until I just have been scrolling through your video archive as we've been recording this episode, and it seems like the ships or the videos which you make proper, like fully edited things for, like really great content, are either laser ships or Minmatar. So like, why do you hate the Caldari and Galente?
I will say that there's probably one ship in particular you're thinking about that probably finds its way into every single video, and there's probably I'll address it in a moment. It's my number one ship now, and I talk about this in my 9th commentary video. But that's interesting that you say that. That you bring that up. I'm trying to think of Galente ships I have in my hangar.
The only video I have found where you go through and do like proper editing, that timeline stuff you're talking about for Galente, is just the Brutix Navy issue, commentary number 4. All the rest of them are like Slipneers, Vagabonds, Phantasms, Legions, stuff like that.
So, let me think. So there's similarities between the weapon systems and the race, those two races in general. I think that they give a good amount of... So when you're out solo or you're fighting other players and you're fighting large amounts of them, again, I talk about this in my 9th commentary video for anyone interested. Flexibility is probably your number one asset as a solo player or a small gang player. When you're flexible, it's not that you're like the jack of all trades and the master of none. It's that you just have... Your engagement profile is so wide now, and that there are certain ways you can execute in order to, give yourself favorable advantages to fight, this ship or that ship. So those Sleipnirs and Vagabonds, those use I think maybe autocannons, or I don't know about the Sleipnir. I've used autocannon and artillery Sleipnirs before, but in either case, those ships, especially after surgical strike, ships like the Pulse Legion and the Vagabond, they've been enhanced in flexibility so much so that they're just a very good pick for me. The 100-man Legion, for example, extremely slippery. It gives you flexibility to go in and brawl, but you have a sort of egress point to be able to get out with that 100-man. You also have a bit of damage mitigation. You have a healthy amount of local tank, like face tank, and the Vagabond's sort of the same way. So these are just really flexible ships and that I enjoy flying, and that give me sort of the widest engagement profile possible. That's really interesting. I might have to go back and look at Galente ships of mine. But the Brutix Navy is an obvious pick because it has a tracking bonus, right? I think other ships like the Demos or a normal Brutix I don't use because they don't have tracking bonuses, and the tracking is abysmal. And it's a very non-flexible ship, the Deimos is. It's very good at one thing. It's very good at shooting battle cruisers, and battleships, because it does a lot of damage, it has a lot of tank, it's very, very fast, but it's not very good at killing frigates, which is a really important part of being flexible and having, that's probably one of the most important ranges of that sort of engagement profile.
So you find the tracking isn't sufficient even with the scram web combo?
Well, for a blaster Deimos, even then, so no. The fall off bonus is good, but I think it would still struggle to track frigates. But rails especially, the tracking is abysmal, and it's not a ship I'm fond of, at least for solo or very small scale combat.
Alternatively, when you're out on the field hunting around, what are the favorite ships to fight? Like, what do you just see at an enemy fleet and you go, okay, I got this. Easy kill.
So, some things you have to consider are, one, are you going to be able to kill them? Are you going to die to them? And are they going to fight you? And those are the three things that run through my mind when I find a group of players to fight. And typically that's either, if I'm lucky, I just stumble upon them, like already formed and they're out and about. And then it's a matter of, okay, I need to get the means to interdict them and slow them down and be able to get my ship of choice onto them. I need to catch up to them somehow. Or other times it's, I'm out baiting a fight, right? I'm out appearing as though I'm solo. And I do all this from a wormhole in the past years in Gorin and in Samurai specifically. I've always operated from a wormhole because it gives you this element of like evasion. Like these people will not see your friends on the map, or you'll be hidden in your wormhole, right? It's a very secluded. You're hidden from them, right? So it gives you an advantage. Your opponents don't see you. So I might go out and bait a fight with something like a frigate, like a Dramiel, or I don't know. I've had a few over the years, like a Daredevil or Slicer. What else? Typically a frigate, maybe even a tactical destroyer, a ship that has business. People will expect you to be solo, because if you go to a wormhole and you start hunting in a stiletto or a saber, doesn't matter. People know that ship isn't alone. Nobody's soloing in a saber or a stiletto, right? So my goal is to entice players to come try and fight me, and if they decide to really escalate heavily, that's when I can respond either with friends or an alternate character, or go back and reship. And that's sort of how I get those fights. And I make those decisions. One, am I going to die to them? Two, how well can I kill them? And three, are they going to fight me? Because if they don't fight you, you don't get a fight. That's probably the most important part, is being engageable and sort of hiding those advantages that you create for yourself.
Yeah, that is definitely tricky.
So are there any ships that you tend to see, like if you go out and say a vagabond or something, are there certain ships you tend to see that almost always will try to fight you, that think they can take you?
Well, when you're solo, if you find many people, typically they will fight you always, because you are just the one versus the many, right? So in terms of T1 cruisers, the Caracal is head and shoulders above the rest, and you tend to see this ship over other T1 cruisers, for example. Assault frigates, for things like light tackle, you tend to see the Stiletto and the Jaguar, for example, more often than any of the rest, right? So your question was, what ships do I find the most often?
Yeah, or I guess when you're solo like that, are there certain ships that kind of think they can take you, but you catch them by surprise, essentially, that you like seeing because you think they'll engage you?
It's not so much ships, it's amount of players. So if I'm against a 2v1 or a 3v1, or against scary spooky ships like recons, I think that these players think they have an advantage to sort of specifically deny my mobility, like rapiers and Lokis, for example. And they do have an advantage, and if I was in their ship, I think I could kill a vagabond reliably, but I believe that they're really confident that the vagabond, and this was the case when I began using the ship. I talk a bit about this in my commentary video, but the vagabond for a very long time wasn't a respected ship. It was thought to be a relic of the past, or a shield brawler, 100 men or over prop or cap stable. And my effort to bring sort of this kiting vagabond back, I don't think anyone, frankly, saw it coming. And no one really knew what to expect from the ship. So you could do things like, brawl Lokis, for example. And if you have a medium energy neutralizer, Lokis have notoriously bad cap. So these are ships that get pretty confident in being able to hold you down, but they have weaknesses that you can exploit. And there are quite many. I think Fiercely Wander, my Vagabond video specifically, has a lot of those moments where I exploit some of the weaknesses of like Mimitar Recons and some really nasty ships.
Speaking of the Vagabond, there are some upcoming changes that are about to affect it in a not great way. And I'm really glad that we have you here because we are talking about the Bastions of War Patch, which has a number of changes which directly affect Small Gang. So, I don't know where you want to start. I know you're a Vargar aficionado, so we could go there, but let's talk, since we've got Vagabonds on the brain, let's talk about some of these changes to HACs that they're proposing. This is a pretty substantial nerf to HACs, reducing the duration and value of the assault damage control and removing the micro-warp drive signature radius bloom penalty, which is a huge, huge aspect of their survivability against battleships, especially at range. So we were talking about this before the show. You kind of mentioned you don't think it's that bad.
I don't, in a way. After looking, I did some research and I started doing some PIFA simulation on just of HACs and what sort of weapon systems do increased damage to them now. And I don't think the HAC signature radius removal is, I don't think it's, how do I put this? I don't think it's as detrimental as I think many players are reacting to it in a way. That wasn't very good English, but whatever, you guys probably get the point. It definitely has consequences, and it definitely increases the damage you take versus certain weapon systems. But the strength of HACs is always their raw tank and their elevated resists over T1 ships, and their ability to fit the assault damage control sort of in a way, and not normalize it, but it sort of justifies this change. And in a way, it brings up the question, should the assault damage control ever have been a thing to begin with? But that's, of course, a can of worms that's been opened that I don't think can be undone. So this is the direction that sort of HACs are going to see. But you have two lines of ships, assault frigates and heavy assault cruisers, that have this ability to take tremendous amounts of DPS for a short amount of time and either react according, like warp off or receive reps with the assault damage control. So now we're seeing, okay, we're going to try and elevate the damage they take in order to strain the assault damage control a little bit more for the HACs that fit them. But namely, things like carrier fighters, battleship weapons, or heavy missiles, those are going to be the weapon systems that apply to the HACs a bit better. Like medium weapon systems, like medium beams and artillery will, of course, apply as well or better in a way, but I don't know. I don't think it's as Armageddon as people are making it out to be.
Yeah,
I think worth noting that your Vagabond fit, which you're bringing back, does not have an ADC fit.
It doesn't, and so that was one thing I was considering, either fitting one or just seeing, because when I fly the Vagabond, one of the things I talk about in the commentary video is that the Vagabond is a strong ship in the current meta because it's resilient to just face tanking a bunch of damage, and not many other, like a Zealot doesn't have a tank bonus, but that shield boost bonus with Tech 2 Mimitar resists, it lets you, you won't repel it, but you can just soak all that long range damage, things like jackdaws, light missiles, rapid lights, small railguns. And you have this package that has battlecruiser levels of EHP, battlecruiser, I talk about this in the video, battlecruiser durability, frigate mobility, and heavy assault cruiser signature radius with a flexible weapon system. Now, heavy assault cruiser signature radius isn't the case anymore, at least after these patches go through. But that package of frigate mobility with a huge amount of EHP is just, it lets you bully so many things on a grid when you're able to take that and withstand that sort of punishment. Because in a meta where like long range projection sort of governs your advantage. If you're able to get your damage out onto target sooner, you create an advantage for yourself. And sort of think about it like a foot race, right? If you're able to start before your opponent, if your opponent, even if he runs faster than you, if you are able to, if you have a long enough head start in terms of time, you'll still come out ahead of your opponent, right? And so think of it this way: if the opponent that you're racing, that you had a head start against, the surgical strike was sort of making that opponent faster, those close range weapon systems, making them even faster. And so you're closing the gap a little bit and giving players an avenue and a decision to make. If I can get on top of my opponent, I can kill them really, really fast. But here, I think still the problem that remains is that long range weapon systems just they're too fast, right? They're running down the track too fast in that little foot race. And so I think their damage needs to be toned down significantly. But that's definitely a tangent there. What was the original question? I'm sorry.
We're talking about your not having a damage control on the Vagabond fit that you like.
And so in a solo small gang sense, the assault damage control, the question I had to ask myself is it going to make a difference in 95% of the fights? The answer is no. I talk a bit about this in the video. Again, I go super in depth. But if you are up against like burst damage platforms like Rapid Lights, let's say you're up against 2 Orthreses, for example, and you're just at 0, you're just brawling them, which is disingenuous because Orthreses are very, very fast. So if you compare this to 2 Serbs or just 2 Rapid Light ships in general, lots of burst damage. If you activate the ADC, and your ADC gives you an amount of EHP in terms of DPS, right? You have a difference in resistances, and with a certain amount of applied damage, you'll have a difference in damage taken, right? And so you want to activate it when the damage is the highest. But even then, you won't be able to kill like a second ship. Basically, my decision was, am I going to either save my ship entirely or kill more ships with an assault damage control? The answer was no. So that's why I choose not to fit one, because for one, the durability in terms of the resists, the large shield extender, and the XLASB were plenty.
You do recommend the XLASB over, say, like a faction regular shield?
Yeah, because a faction regular shield takes a lot of capacitor, right? Ancillary shield booster doesn't take any cap. Gives you more flexibility to use your new defensively.
Good point.
Yeah, and what I'd say is your point about the ADC kind of plays into a lot of these changes. You can tell are really aimed at the large scale fleet fights, because like you said, the short burst of high resistances in small gang doesn't necessarily make a huge difference. A lot of times it's not going to correlate with either saving your ship or taking down another ship with you. But when we see it in large scale fleets, especially where you have like a alpha comp versus an alpha comp, really being able to ADC for long enough that people can lock you up and get reps on you is huge, and a big reason why we don't see a ton of things dying in these large fleets unless you can just straight alpha through things. And so I think like looking at these changes, both the base resistances and the duration of the ADC, I think they're both really aimed, and the signature differences are all really aimed at large scale fleet tactics, not necessarily small gang nerfs. I mean, they indirectly nerf small gang hacks as well, but I think that largely they're aimed at trying to break up the hack meta in large scale fleet fights.
I would be lying if I said that I never wished I had an assault damage control in a certain fight. There are many times in many fights where I would think to myself, I wish I had an assault damage control right now, namely against things like Rapid Lights or whatnot. But it's still, and that's largely the case today. I still haven't changed the fit very much, and I don't really fit an ADC on many of my Vagabonds. But to say that I never wish, or it's never useful to me, it would be disingenuous. There are many cases where I would like an ADC, but I just don't have one because it's not useful in at least 90% of fights, and it doesn't get me an extra kill, or it doesn't save my ship, so to speak. But are there circumstances where it would? Yes, absolutely.
Well, as everyone knows, the hacks are one of my favorite. Hacks and assault frigates, my favorite ship classes in the game, and I think my reaction to this more than anything else is twofold. One, how much a single ship is really driving this, that being the Muninn, why they're hitting the entire class when very few of the other hacks are regularly used. I think it's a bit of an overreaction to the Munin's power, which ultimately is an issue with the medium artillery weapon system and not even necessarily the Muninn itself.
There are a few things if I want to chime in.
I mean, there's a couple things. Like, it could have, like, it doesn't need a drone bay, for instance. Still don't know why it has a drone bay.
So recall the, I mean, it has a drone bay because it's Mimitar, right? I really don't think the drones are the reason why the Muninn's so broken. But recall the Muninn's changes in the last 5 years. So way back in the day when Elo Knight specifically started using the Muninn in Black Legion, the Muninn did not have an ADC, and nor did it have 4 mid slots, right? Changes that occurred to the Muninn were first the addition of the 4th mid slot and the loss of the high slot, right? Because players argued that the Muninn was just this absolutely useless ship that couldn't fit a shield tank, and meanwhile no one's crying for a mid slot for the Wolf, which was I don't know, those ships specifically, the Wolf and the Muninn, they're not meant to be, and I'm not saying not meant to be shield tank, but like not having mid slots is their weakness, right? And taking a utility high slot from a Mimitar is just like a cardinal sin in my opinion. So recall that the Muninn had that 4th mid slot in order to fit, in many cases, another shield extender or another invuln, for example, just more tank, right? And so that wasn't the thing that made the Muninn overpowered. It was a combination of adding that 4th mid slot and then the assault damage control and never revisiting the ship class again until the bonuses were addressed, right? The reduction of the damage and the range. But my proposal for fixing the Muninn comes, you just revisit. You go back to the 3 mid slot Muninn with the high slot, because now you have this, very paper ship, right? This, it's not very tank, but its tank comes from its speed and its mobility, right? That's the advantage of the ship. You can't put another shield extender on it and an ADC and expect this thing to be balanced. So if you take away a mid slot, you give its high slot back, and you give it back its 10% bonuses instead of 5%, you give it the 10% optimal. You change the optimal range to fall off. So that way you can't spam tremor and long range ammo, because those are the ammo types that scale with optimal range. And so you're reducing the damage in a way with the fall off bonus on a Muninn when you change from optimal to fall off. Tracking bonus is fine. And then I think I would maybe take away some capacitor and add some recharge time to the total recharge time of the Muninn. The speed is fine, but really it's that 4th mid slot that makes the Muninn so competitive. And I think that is solely the reason why the Muninn's so powerful, is because it received that 4th mid slot in addition to an ADC, and neither of those two things the ADC was there to stay. So in my opinion, the answer is taking away that 4th mid slot. That's what solves the Muninn, in my opinion.
Would you kind of agree, though? I mean, it sounds like you're on the same page, but that really the Muninn is the hack that's kind of driving the issues with the class, not so much the entire hack class as a whole.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, that's my beef. I just think it's poor balanced strategy to hit the whole class. And the meta before all of this is, aside from Elo's niche Muninn use, like, hacks were in a pretty bad place for a really long time. They were being edged out by T3s. They were being edged out by battlecruisers. I feel like this is taking away some of the things that were added in to make them as a class more competitive with other types of Eve ships, but it isn't really replacing that with anything.
Again, I feel as though it's really easy to overestimate the SIG bonus. Really, the only differences in damage increases you're going to see applied to the ship are battleship weaponry, heavy missiles in a way, and carrier fighters and dreads, which, I mean, those are all ships larger than the hack itself, right?
That's kind of the hack's point, though, is it's supposed to be kind of a big ship counter.
Yeah, and my argument would be, if you think about what the meta was kind of before hacks were the mainline DPS, is it was largely battleship comps. It was like Typhoons, Megathrons, those kind of things. And so I think that, one of the big reasons that hacks kind of took over is because you can sig tank those large battleship platforms. So I think that maybe the removing the sig reduction will make those larger battleship comps a little bit more viable.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, if you want signature reduction, it fit an afterburner, I guess. AB zealots, armor hacks use ABs. Like, why I don't know. I think it's a very blanket, hammer to hacks, but is it going to be the end of the world? Absolutely not. I think hacks are going to be fine.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
we'll
think
probably see Afterburner hacks come back into prominence, but that's a lot of their mobility gone, obviously.
Well,
Right.
that's the thing that's making the Muninn broken. Like, if you watch these big fleet fights, it's Muninn's burning for 30 seconds, trying to volley another Muninn, and then everybody warps off, and people keep pinging back and forth, and it's the most uninteresting, stale fighting I've ever seen in the history of EVE.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point that needs to be highlighted is you can still sig tank by doing afterburners, but then you have to make the choice of whether you're going to be slow but sig tank or whether you're going to be fast but not have the sig tank. And I think that makes you choose, like forces you to make a decision that you didn't have to make before, right? Before
Yeah.
you could just MWD and you could go, 2000 plus easily and just kite around at like 100 kilometers. And that won't be the case anymore if you want to still mitigate damage.
I like that choice. I'm very concerned that the hacks are gonna fade again.
No, they're still very strong for their innately high resists and their ability to receive remote reps very well. I don't anticipate them going away. It's just going to be much harder against battleships and carriers and Hodreds.
Speaking of battleships, the Marauder is getting buffed. This is a long overdue tweak to Marauders, and they're going in some interesting directions. Now, Auraus, you're like, I don't know if you consider yourself an expert, but you've definitely got a lot of Vargur time under your belt, a lot of kills. And I think you've made some comments, at least in our Discord, like, look what I'm able to do pre-patch. And now the rate of fire for all Bastion large weapons is going up by 50%. They're cutting the Bastion duration. It was originally 60 seconds. I think they're proposing putting it down to 30 seconds now. And the Vargur itself is getting a slight change. I think this might actually be I don't know if it's
a favorable
strictly...
one.
Is it favorable? Okay. Mm-hmm. It's a 5% projectile rate of fires that they have. It's moving to 7.5% flat damage bonus for large projectiles.
Yeah, and just to be thorough, so they're also changing the Paladin and Chronos. They're basically just rebalancing the cap so that they're more cap stable with the guns that they have that use capacitor. And then also target range and sensor strength on Marauders is increasing so they can lock farther and they're harder to jam.
Well, pretty exciting. I think a 30-second Bastion module, just in general, is itself pretty awesome. The rate of fire increase is huge.
So the speculation, and I should say feedback or comments directly from CCP, namely CCP Rise, have been all over the place for Marauders. So initially, they announced the 50% rate of fire, but it was with a Bastion duration increase to 60 seconds. And sort of you can see the gears turning in the minds of the CCP balance team, and rightfully so. This is pretty healthy levels of balance. You've given players a carrot and a stick. You've given them the carrot, which is their 50% rate of fire, doubles the damage across the board for all the Marauders. And in return, CCP have asked that players commit for a little bit longer, 30 seconds, 50% more duration. And so that was the incentive, right? Your incentive is 50% more, 100% more damage, but you have to stay on grid for 50% longer. And it was, you can't leave, right, to Bastion. But in either case, now we've seen a second iteration from CCP Rise, a comment on Reddit. It would have been down to 30 seconds. And so CCP Rise had received feedback from players that said that it broke the center jump drive unit and the 60-second Bastion, because previously players could MJD and then Bastion, MJD and then Bastion, and as a player of this sort of cycle you went through in order to on your Marauder. And that was a sort of cycle and synergy that you had between those two elements of the Marauder if you choose to fit a micro jump drive and choose to use it. So now we've seen a complete 180, which I think completely breaks it not only makes these things flexible, it makes them slippery, it makes them non-committal, and it's going to make them incredibly strong and borderline overpowered. I think this 32nd Bastion would have missed is just getting an absolute nightmare to hold down, considering that they do upwards of 2,000, like a Chronos out to 50 kilometers, 2,600 DPS in Bastion. It's ridiculous. As a tracking score of an RDHFI. These ships are going to be very for subcaps to hold.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Very strong, to say the least. Incredibly strong.
The cap, like, rework on it, I get that if you're firing your lasers all the time, to a certain extent, like, they needed to fix the cap issue. But that bonus to a lot of areas like wormholes and stuff like that. Just wanna...
The outcry about the capacitor. Can we curse on the show?
Absolutely.
Just, like, harden the fuck up, please. Because players who their paladin, when you look at it from like, let's say saviors, for example, that increase those implants that increase your reps HP. The same is true with the damage and the unit capacitor of Marauders. You're doing the same amount of... So quite frankly, my response to you, so that it's you get this free rate of fire increase. I thought that was, I don't know, I strongly disliked CCP's response. I think players should fit their ships or play accordingly better, fit their ship, better, use boosters or whatever. If you want more cap, fit for more cap, get more cap. You figure out the way to go. I thought that was... Go ahead, sorry.
I think I agree with that to a certain extent, and that's why I prefer the cap pool bonus, because you can play more around the original bonus than you can play with how often you're fire, actually in a lot of the PvE scenarios where, like, you would experience those most, and switching targets,
for
stuff
you
like
as
that.
A Marauder pilot against energy neutralization. When you're fighting against energy neutralizers, it's in your interest to convert all of your capacitor to useful things, right? Things that you do for your ship, either ripping or doing damage in the case of the Kronos and the Paladin. Or perhaps using offensive things like web scrams, paints, neutralizations come to mind, counter-neuting someone comes to mind. So probably some more interesting bonuses I'd like to see on Bastion are not the amount, but the cycle time. I guess amount and cycle time would be interesting, but the fact that you have a rate of fire bonus on these ships means that, say, after you take a heavy nuke to the face or a sequence of energy neutralizers, you're able to inject, and you will convert all of that capacitor to your guns. You'll transfer it. You'll be able to consume it yourself before your opponent's able to nuke it and take it away from you. That was already a massive buff. If you can do that twice as fast now, you can convert twice as much capacitor to twice as much damage in a shorter time frame, which makes you resilient against energy neutralizers. That was a huge buff, and I think the fact that players missed it and were very ornery in saying, "Oh, my capacitor is going to be bad now because of the rate of fire. You didn't give it activation." Again, harden the fuck up. Like, fit your ship correctly. Like, CCP shouldn't be babying the game and making it more accommodating to players, and lowering the skill barrier for an expensive ship. If you can't find some way to feed your guns capacitor, either in your place, like in your execution or in your theory crafting, then lose your Marauder for all I care.
Yeah. So I'll preface this by saying that I think I agree with your points. But the one, I guess, to play devil's advocate here, the one argument I would say is if you look at the rate of fire bonus for anything that doesn't use cap. So for Vargar and the Golem, you have basically no drawback, right? Like your weapons aren't using caps, so your rate of fire is just a pure buff 100%. But if you look at the Paladin and the Chronos, you get the rate of fire bonus, which is a buff, but that comes at the cost of something. So it is a buff, but it has a trade-off. And so I think that the argument for the changes to the capacitor for the Chronos and the Paladin is that the other two got basically straight buffs, while the buffs for those two came with a downside as well. Which I don't think is a bad thing, right? I think your argument for that being, that has some benefits and that being kind of a worthy trade-off is 100%. But I think the argument would be that for the other two platforms that don't use capacitor, that's not necessarily the case. You don't have a trade-off there.
Those are strictly comparisons between the weapon systems, though, right? Like if you want to fit a laser ship, you have instant ammo switching, right? Instant ammo switching, and you shoot completely in optimal range. That's an advantage that autocannons don't have. If you're shooting hybrid turrets, for example, you have a 5-second reload instead of a 10-second reload. Like those are just innate characteristics of the weapon system that are advanced. Like that's not exclusive to Marauders. So that's why, So that's why I'm incredibly harsh about the change. And, like I said, quite frankly, harden the fuck up, fit your Marauder well, play better.
Yeah, and I think I agree there too, which is why I preface it by saying I think I agree with you on this. But I think that would be the counter argument that people will throw out there. So I wanted to at least put it out there for it to be addressed.
Moving on to some of the other changes, we had some buffs to Dictors, everything except the Saber, including to the Eris, which is arguably just as good as the Saber already. And now I would say it probably is definitely better.
Wait, what?
Yes. The time has come. I'm officially passing the crown. I'm taking it off the Saber's head, putting it on the Eris's head. All of EVE history has been reversed, and now the Eris is king. That's just how I'm saying
explain?
it. The Eris is getting its plate mass reduction increased from 15% to 20%, which means essentially, you're practically fitting armor plates on this thing for free in terms of their drawbacks. And it's also getting a rate of fire bonus from 5% moved up to 7.5%. So this thing is now essentially as fast, if not slightly faster, tougher for sure. And frankly, if it can get on top of you, it's going to be putting out more damage.
Yeah, range is really the only downside of the Eris now compared to the Saber. I think, I can't think of another reason why Saber would be better.
And even then, you could fit an Eris with railguns, and that range drawback is totally negated for a lot less penalty than trying to put artillery on a Saber.
Is there a PIFA version with these changes?
I think so. I haven't looked, but I think there's a pre-release version.
Because I remember trying to fit rails on an Eris for an AT comp one time, and if you've tried fitting rails on an Eris with a plate, maybe stuff has changed, maybe my memory's wrong, but you don't have fitting room.
I'm not confident that you do have
Saber and Mimitar ships is that autocannons use such a tiny amount of power grid, and the medium shield extenders use such a tiny amount of power grid, and relative to the benefits they give you. And then you have those low slots, which you can, for the CPU, you can throw a nano in there. It is still super helpful to you if you run short on that particular fitting room. So the flexibility was there for the fitting on the Saber, which is how you could get so much out of it. I don't feel like it's there on the Eris. These bonuses make you better. I still don't think you're going to compete with the Saber.
I think the competition is over. Maybe we have our poll for the episode, but I'm pretty sure the Eris is king right now. It's going to take forever because everybody's trained into Sabers, but if you just look at the numbers on it, there's very little reason, very few circumstances in which you would say that the Saber is the right choice for the job.
Are there some, I'd say, innate advantages that the Saber have over other interdictors, namely the Heretic and the Eris, and that if you take an amount of damage, say from fighters or something, you're probably in a carrier, you'll get that back over time. You can regen, either cloaked or that's something that the Eris can't really do.
All right, that's fair.
But then the counter to that is now the Flycatcher is getting a shield HP bonus.
Yeah, Flycatcher is definitely the sleeper here. That's the one that I think everyone's going to. It got a massive buff, huge HP in the last interdictor patch, and now it's become even stronger.
Yeah,
it's just more of a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that really makes these changes surprising, I guess, is the fact that not only are these all only to the Saber, or only to the interdictors other than the Saber, but there was already a patch that buffed all interdictors except the Saber. So really, like, the Saber's been kind of left in the dust for 2 changes now, which, again, I think the first one, everyone knew that the Saber was overpowered as far as, like, compared to the others in the class, but I don't know if that warrants 2 separate changes that entirely buff all others except the Saber.
I think my biggest concern is now the Saber lacks identity. All these have pretty distinct. I mean, the Eris and the Heretic are kind of bumping up against each other, but I think it's more of the Eris's fitting allowing it to do the double plate fit. If it didn't have the fitting to do the double plate fit, I think you'd have more of a distinction there.
Right.
But the Eris, the Saber, I feel like it almost needs some kind of speed or agility bonus on instead of what it currently has to just make it stand out more as the thing you might pick.
Right, because that's kind of the distinction they give them now, right? Is you have 2 dictors that are very tanky that have the HP bonuses, and you have 2 dictors that are supposed to be kind of fast and agile, and that being the Eris and the Saber. But because the Saber hasn't had any bonuses, I don't know if it really has that fast, agile identity, at least compared to the Eris. I think it's still fairly agile, but not. I guess that's just an inherent part of the whole, and maybe not as bonused as we see with the Eris.
Mm-hmm. Well, potentially some Saber tweaks down the line, I would imagine, but I think CCP will wait to see how this plays out. I mean, if you think about sort of the meta reason of why they might do this, obviously people were still using Sabers despite all the buffs. So they weren't seeing adoption rates for the Eris and Flycatcher and Heretic up to what they wanted it to be. So they're making them a little more attractive. I, for one, will certainly give them a try. A few other miscellaneous things. I know the show is running long, so we're just going to skip over these real quick. They're buffing the Stasis Web Probe. It's getting a strength and area of effect increase, a pretty substantial one, actually. You'll probably see more of those out there. And the Revelation is getting its triple plate fit nerfed through some power grid changes. So while it'll be possible to still fit the triple plate, you're definitely going to have to make some more sacrifices if you want to do that. It's likely this will knock that particular fit out of the Dread Bomb meta. It's not 100%, but it seems likely, especially once people skill into more alternative fits. Well, let's talk about one more important game change that I think I was certainly not paying much attention to in the patches leading up to this. I'll be fully honest with you. When I heard that they were going to add in fleet formations and I saw the trailer, like, okay, cool. It's going to look nice. It's definitely a gift to anyone who's making YouTube content for EVE because it's very pretty and organized. But in terms of actual application, I figured it would not be that interesting. Whatever formation your fleet lands in, they're going to ball up on the anchor anyway. There's no penalty for like shooting through a friendly, so there's no need to worry about where your ship is in relation to everyone else for purposes of applying damage. It's not like you have to make sure everyone has clear line of sight or anything like that. And vice versa, it's not like someone shooting 5 kilometers behind you can block them or anything like that. So there's some limited application there. But they have done something very cool, which is they've made the formations much larger than I could have anticipated. We're talking like 200 kilometers potential ranges between ships, which can interact with the warp mechanics in very interesting ways.
Yeah, it's a thing.
That's the thing. Is anyone excited about it? I mean, the one use that everyone's talking about right now is the rolling ping concept, where you have an interceptor at the front of the fleet, and then everyone else behind. You can just keep the interceptor moving, and they can just constantly be warped too. You can already kind of do that now. It's just easier.
I think it destroys some of the potent effects of non-targeted interdiction. So interdictor bubbles or HACs, for example, because if you're able to have the warp initiator warp in line with the bubble, but have your fleet not be bubbled, and warp sort of without consequence, I think that is especially from a balance perspective, that's not something that's healthy.
Yeah, I
I
think
just-
there's. Oh, go ahead, Artemis.
I just hope that CCP introduces this with a very convoluted UI and a lack of hotkeys, so that we see a couple of fleets whelp because they accidentally use the wall warp formation when warping to a gate. That's just, I want to see it happen.
Oh, I guarantee it will.
And if nothing else comes of these changes, nobody uses them after that, I'd be fine. As long as we get a couple of whelps because somebody uses the wrong formation when they're warping to a gate, I'd be happy.
I hate to be so pessimistic, but it definitely seems a growing trend that the game, especially with changes like these, it seems to progressively be made easier and easier from it seems like more like an RTS from a humor perspective, right? One person controlling many different units.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of, I guess, concern or worry about this for a couple of reasons. I think like one big advantage that you had as being a more veteran player was range control, right? Like if you're in a ship that's fast, and you can kind of control the range so that you're not close enough that a fleet can warp to you, you can kind of pick off people who are away from their group, when the rest of their fleet can't warp to them. But here, there's an easy way for you to basically readjust grid and also put tackle ahead of someone and things like that. And so I think, especially for veteran players looking at this, they can see lots of ways that you could essentially abuse this to kind of mitigate some of the advantages that people who are skilled and have like learned how to kind of control and position on grid have at the moment. And I think that's where a lot of the concern or backlash to these changes is coming from. And like, I mean, just to give an example of that, so like, if a ship was 50 kilometers off, or let's say you are 200 kilometers off of a target, there's your tackle ships that are 50 kilometers ahead of you. If you were to warp at 50, your tackle would land directly on top of whoever you're warping to, if you can get a ping on there or something like that. Like let's say you have an interceptor that's gotten a ping behind them or something. You can essentially like manipulate the grid or warp repeatedly, and you can move someone who normally wouldn't be able to warp on top of someone who normally would be in a safe spot, I guess is the way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, if they just like shortened the effective range of this nonsense so that it couldn't have that rolling warp impact, I think it'd be cool. Not a super huge big deal, and that'd be the end of it.
Yeah, and I do want to point out
it'd be
that
nice
that was
to warp my fleet and have the Logi stay behind the DPS. It still requires everybody to be in the proper position to begin with. Which I think is like one reason I don't think this is going to be as impactful as people expect it to be, because it still requires the proper position to begin with in order to utilize these mechanics. So I think it adds complexity. You could say theoretically it makes stuff easier.
I think what you
we're
pointed
gonna
out,
have to see how that shakes out, but
yeah, I think so. To kind of just highlight it, they did mention that if this is really broken, kind of one of the first things they can adjust is the distance at which you can do this relative warp. So changing it from 200 kilometers to like 30 or 40. And I think that would make this a much less game breaking thing. If it ends up being game breaking, I think that's still yet to be determined. But I think that's like the first thing, if I was a developer, that I'd tweak is the range at which you can use this relative warp to warp people that are on grid with you.
Thing is, if they make it too small, it dramatically lowers the positive potential of this. The only reason it's interesting is because you can do these edge case things. If it's just everybody lands in the same formation, but they're all right next to one another, there's not a ton of value for that in EVE.
Yeah, I would agree there. I mean, you want your Logi maybe like Logi optimal if you're in like a big fleet is around 50, 60 kilometers, I think. So being able to warp your Logi and have your Logi behind you that much to start is a really nice thing. And so, yeah, like you said, I think same thing with rolling pings, like being able to do rolling pings or close to it would be nice. But I can also see how it would be abused. And that's kind of always the question when there's patches, right? Is like, how is it intended to use versus be used versus how is it going to get abused by players?
It's also, I mean, there's a chance. I don't want to get anyone excited about this because it's pure speculation. But there's always a chance that a change like this is maybe like kind of laying the groundwork for something in the future where fleet formation might have more impact, more importance than it currently does with the current mechanics, as maybe things change down the line. Never know. Okay, just one last bit. We have an update on the Big War. There have been a number of very public leaks from Brave's leadership team, and our good bro Dunk Dinkle features among them. They are, I don't know if anyone's been in these type of alliances and these type channels. They seem very familiar. Yeah, everybody wants to do something. The one person who's burnt out because they have to do everything that everyone else decides to do. The one person who's looking at the finances, say we can't actually afford to do this thing. You got the peacemaker, which is a very interesting chat dynamic. Maybe we'll do a dramatic reading down the line or something. But it certainly seems that Legacy is having some issues with their whole let's move into the territory that we're invading thing. They're in general getting the crap beat out of them on a lot of fronts right now. They are losing some key structures in their home space, including a very expensive Soitio. And meanwhile, they're having difficulty establishing themselves in Quirius, where Imperium and Imperium allies are pushing back. Some interesting stuff. And we've talked a bunch about sort of the viability or the potential risks of the whole let's move into Quirius while we're still attacking Delve thing. And for test, I think they probably want to move into Delve proper. Questionable. Questionable. It does sort of save them from having to fight a two-front war, but it only does so by virtue of the fact that they're abandoning everything that they've left behind. They're not like taking the time to pull structures down and safely relocating them. They just seem to be letting them die.
Yeah, and I think that's the big issue is they haven't a lot of the infrastructure they have back home is just burning and falling. And for a long time, they kind of had this benefit of being blue to pretty much everyone except goons and a few people allied with goons. But I think as the war's gone on, we've seen a lot of the third parties that were like, yeah, we'll join in and help beat up on goons have now been like, okay, we did that for a while. We helped you. Now we're going to do our own thing, which includes killing your stuff back home. And so I think that's really what we've seen is a shift from a lot of the third parties. And I guess in it too has been hitting Test back at home and Brave back at home. But it's been also a lot of kind of third parties that initially were either entirely kind of unaligned or were even somewhat helping Test against goons that are hitting them back home.
Wrecking Crew comes to mind. Gobbled up like half of Catch.
Yep. Yeah, especially Dread Bomb has a good chunk of space there too. Or within RC, yeah.
Shout out to our bros in Tickle, our Australian homies.
I saw the Tengu video this morning, actually. It was wonderfully edited. I was quite jealous of the editing prowess of the video.
Yeah,
it was a really good watch. Sped up fleet with comms as well. That was a very enjoyable watch. I watched the entire thing.
Yeah, so Tickle has some of the best video editors I've seen. They have a couple really, really good videos that are very cinematic. They're as far as big fleet type stuff goes, they're probably the most enjoyable ones to watch. And then JJ, who I think is their main FC, is also a very good FC. He's really good to listen to. So Tickle videos, I don't know if they have a proper channel or if it's a channel under one of their members, but definitely worth watching if you have the time.
Now, I will preface all this by they're losing structures and a lot of ISK, but they're not actually losing any members. So the membership seems pretty flat. So it's only a matter of time to see, will this affect their morale, or will it just be kind of embarrassing? Maybe they'll lose the ability to SRP, but they'll get through it. The channel leaks did mention the fact that their SRP is, at least Brave's SRP is practically gone at this point.
Yeah, I guess that's also kind of maybe a nuance we should point out there is it's not necessarily Test as a whole. Even in the leaks, they kind of talk about some of the things Test has infrastructure set up in the new staging and stuff like that. But Brave do not. And so one of the things in one specific link, I'll have to see if I can find the link to it again. But in one of the leaks, they basically talk about how Brave, some of the more industrial side of things, is worried because if they stage out of Test keep stars. They essentially don't have a market, and a market is where a lot of the leadership money comes from taxes, from stocking things, and all that kind of stuff. And so one of the concerns is that they're leaving all their infrastructure behind without the ability to set up new infrastructure that generates income where they're going.
Well, God bless them if they're able to make money off of market taxes in nullsec, because man, it is hard with the recent CCP changes. What was it, last year or the year before that? They basically cut market income in half. It sucks.
I mean, it's easier when you have 2,000 members that you're all shoving into one citadel that you're using for staging. So
yeah, true. Recruit me some people, Andy.
All right, we're gonna
Artemis, get a rental alliance. Let's go.
Sending out those 2,000 membership invites.
Yes, let's do it.
The one thing I'd have to say about this is that I have two perspectives on it. Either this is a silly choice to make because Legacy could hold their space while simultaneously conquering Delph, in which case right now you're just screwing your morale because you're giving your enemies easy wins while all of the gains that you have to make are going to be more and more difficult. Or they realize that they couldn't hold their space while simultaneously taking Delve, in which case this is the ultimate didn't want that space anyway. Which I'm trending towards this is the latter situation. And so, it is what it is. This is the best choice that they could have made given the circumstances if they realize it is just not viable to hold their existing space and push in and fully conquer Delve.
Boris, do you get into any of this nullsec stuff even as a spectator, or do you don't care whose name has on the thing, you just want to kill them?
No, it's absolutely relevant to me, because when I roll into these regions, or perhaps I filament in these regions, it's very important to know what's going on in the landscape of New Eden and having some knowledge of geography on your side. If you know the context of conflicts, you can expect certain groups to be sort of patrolling the area. I ran into this not even a few days ago. Civ Squads had a gang that was going to fight Brave. They were going towards Brave staging, and so I found them and I Vargared them. It was very fun.
I'm really curious about fights that happen in and around Entosis areas, because when Entosis was rolled out and the whole rework of Sov, it was like you're going to have smaller fleets roaming around. And my hope was that would mean fleets that are easier to take on as a third party.
Entosis is one of my favorite things to roll into. My heart races when I roll into a system when I see nodes on, because people fight over that shit.
That's exactly what I was hoping to hear.
Yeah.
Does it change the ship choice that you use, or
No.
just like your existing ships will work wonderfully even better in Entosis world?
So I take off the newt on one of my vagabonds. I have an Entosis vagabond just for Entosis stuff, and so I don't have a newt, but I have an Entosis link, and I can do the same small gang that I can as before. And I can run nodes as well. Just put some Stront in the cargo and get to wanding.
Interesting.
Awesome.
I think maybe the one thing that CCP could make is maybe a dead space grid, like on TCUs and shit. Because did I already talk about this? I mentioned this. Not this specifically, but in a way you can see the trend that CCP is going down as the game becomes older and older and players become more and more experienced. CCP is creating instances of opt-in levels of commitment. So the ESS is a prime example of this. It's no longer just like an ESS in the middle of the system with the little bubble. You warp in, it's gated, right? So CCP has a very heavy hand in controlling the content that's being able to arise from these, ESSs, right? You can't bring capitals in, no frigates, no destroyers, incredibly selective, no afterburners, no micro warp drives, no jump drives within the effect of the bubble. So as we see the game get older and older and players get more experienced, I think we're going to see more influence from CCP to sort of guide us, so to speak, to not levels, but instances of sort of opt-in commitment, as I described them, for players to engage in. And I think the Entosis might be the next one.
Well, I certainly
Interesting
hope
perspective on those limitations, because I think I would want to push back on CCP as limiting it and more of CCP is allowing the balance of the wider game to still be maintained while still creating areas where this idealized fighting can occur. So, like, there are people who really enjoy the brawly style of fighting. Given the meta and the balance of the wider game, the opportunities for that to occur became less and less frequent. And so in order to still provide those opportunities, they create these new areas, so to speak, where they are made viable again without having a wider impact. And so I'm personally quite a fan of that, because it means you can still allow the meta outside of these areas to grow and develop and be a good thing. But within these smaller niche zones, you preserve the style of gameplay which was lost due to the other balance changes.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I think for the longest time they tried to make an overall meta where, you know, both kind of everything could be possible, where you could brawl, where you could kite, and both of those would be viable. And what we've seen is that hasn't been super successful, especially in nullsec, where people can drop caps if you try to brawl at 0 type thing. And so I think, like you said, it kind of opens a spot where different game styles can be viable, without changing the entire meta of the whole game. And so I think I have mixed feelings about that. I think there's some ways that that's maybe like a cop out, but I think in general it's a good thing.
I was going to say, it feels like a bit of a cheat. I can understand the value of it, though.
100% it is a cheat, and I think that I'm a fan of them using that cheat. I think the perspective that it's CCP asserting more control on an area of space, right? I can't take my MWD ship into this bubble. That is definitely a thing. But I'd rather them do that than make my MWD ship worse everywhere else.
Yeah, I think I
that's
agree
my
with that.
perspective on it.
Yeah, and I think in a perfect world you would have something where there's a meta that has room for both, but I think that's maybe easier said than done. And I think
This
if you
is
just look
Eve.
at
This
history,
is not a perfect world.
If you just look at history, I don't think that's happened. You know, they've tried to make brawling and kiting both work and that kind of thing. And like if you look at the, you know, the ammo changes with the close range ammo, DPS buffs and that kind of thing, like that was, I think, all aimed at hopefully making brawling more frequent, I guess, on the kind of outside and the open part of Eve, and that didn't really have the intended effect that I think they wanted it to have there.
I think long range weapon systems need a damage nerf next. Like, because recall that, I swear it was 2015, 2014, right after Inferno, right after Retribution, when I began to play the game. Medium rails, medium artillery, and medium beams all got 15% damage increases because nobody used them. People complained that they weren't used at all, and so now we're facing a meta, you know, several years later, that it's just the dominant force in the meta that governs, you know, who has it. It's like that foot race example that I made earlier, that sort of analogy.
Damage nerf, maybe. Tracking nerf would be interesting. Just an across-the-board tracking nerf.
I think this is a topic that comes up a lot on CCP streams, and when I'm lucky to talk with CCP devs, like CCP Alpha was in my stream chat a few nights ago, and they talked a bit about player behavior and how balance. That's a part of the balance, is that you have to consider how players are interacting with each other. And so if you have a bunch of players who are not taking risks and, you know, like waiting to have every possible advantage before they take a fight, like that's something that goes into this, and that's why we see some of the ESS changes and stuff like that, I think.
Well, we will keep an eye on this as it develops. All right, moving into some highlights. Mine's just super quick. I was part of a relatively impromptu Rogue Capel Black Ops fleet. Literally got a ping and just happened to be at my computer. I was like, yeah, okay, my jump clone's still up there. Hopped in, jump cloned, hopped in a Loki, 2 jumps over, landed on the pig maybe 15 seconds before it popped, and jumped onto a grid full of mining ships and a Rorqual. And we're like, oh, yeah, all right. We tackled the Rourke, killed 1 or 2 of the mining ships. The Rourke safety, they brought in multiple carriers to defend. It was 2 carriers and a fax. The fax warped down to the Rourke wall, as the Rorqual was in panic. Panicked. And then the fax activated its triage module, which pinned it there and left the 2 carriers up at the Sino without any logistic support. So we warped our bomber fleet all the way back up to the carriers and roasted them. It's hilarious. Well, it comes down to that execution, man. That fax pilot did not need to do that. Did not need to press button because there was nothing for him to rep at the time. And because he did, it opened up an opportunity. Rogue Capel guys were really on the ball with it. Overall, it was a really fun fleet. Got some nice kills. Andy?
Yeah, so my highlight was getting power again. So I'm not in Texas. I haven't been out of power for like a week, but I started Sunday, Monday with no power. And then we have single pane windows. We live in a little bit older place, so my house was very promptly like 38 degrees, and it wasn't super fun. But I luckily was only out of power for just under like a day total. 24 hours, so it wasn't terrible. But my highlight out of game, I guess, was just getting power back and being warm again.
Speaking of, we got to give shout outs to Acer Card and Krav. They are long-term members of the Noir family, currently not with Noir right now, but they are in Texas. And I've checked in on them. They're doing okay, but hopefully they and their communities are able to recover.
I'm in Texas, in West Texas, but my region's it's not as affected as the others.
Did you experience any power loss?
Not at all. Just lots of crunchy, fluffy white snow.
Oh, that's nice.
I hate crunchy snow. Crunchy snow's the worst.
It was fluffy. It got crunchy after like the second day, when it sits there.
I gotcha, yep. Fluffy snow is fun. My highlight is been Discord lurking and watching the current active members of Noir do their thing. We've got a contract. We'll probably talk about it a little bit in the future. And just watching everybody, a bunch of names who I have not yet had the opportunity to fly with, do cool stuff. It's fun to see.
You come back anytime soon? What's your plan?
The hope is to, yes. My work schedule is going to be changing, and I've got to wait to see how that levels out, and then hopefully I will have some more time to play EVE again, which will be fun.
We've definitely increased our population of multi-boxers since you went on break.
Ooh.
Yeah.
We should have an internal... I want to have an internal multi-boxing tournament. Oh, this is a question I forgot to ask you, Auraus, AP. You fly solo. There's on and off been a debate within the solo small game community about multi-boxing, true solo, etc., etc. Do you have any strong opinions on that?
I never have. It's always been just semantics and people who, I don't know. I don't. I've never, if you solo with an alt, it's still solo. If you solo with one character, it's still solo.
If you play 5 instruments at the same time, are you a band?
I mean, I'm not sure. I think there's a limit to it because if you're multi-boxing I don't know. Like I said, it's just semantics and it's a pretty, I don't know. I feel like it's a useless argument. Do what you want by yourself, use a different account, whatever, who cares?
Good fights are good fights.
Personally, in your videos at least, you fly a lot of solo, just the one character. Outside of the video context, do you multi-box when you're FCing? Do you use a scout alt?
I have 2 accounts. They're very well skilled, and I use a assortment of combinations of ships whenever I multi-box, and I think that's evident in some of my video content. I have some cool fights recently where I multi-boxed a Falcon and a Nightmare, and I think ECM is really strong, so I've been using it a lot recently. I bought a special Centurion set to increase the range, and Falcon jams are really strong, so whenever I fight, I always have it in my back. I call it, people will refer to it as a pocket Falcon or an honor Falcon, so it's just something you keep cloaked and sort of in your back pocket, so to speak, and whenever you need it, you use it, because typically, like I said, when players get more experience, and since the game's been around so long, if you see an active tank solo battleship, people are really quick to spam Balgorns, but it's unsurprising. It's completely unsurprising to me that many players don't fit their Balgorns very well. So their mid slots are typically filled with like dual webs or a tackle or a cap booster or something, and so they're very vulnerable to high strength ECM coming from a Falcon. So that's something that I use to protect myself and sort of I won't say give me a leg up, but definitely equals the playing field a little bit more. And it's definitely on me to be able to use it well and execute, because multi-boxing a Falcon is pretty difficult. You have to know what to jam and how to win the fight, and so you have to, but it's
That's
fun.
for sure.
it
Multi-boxing is
makes
not
me-
easy. I've been struggling to learn it myself. I've only been able to do one character, and even then, I'm not at the point where I can use them both in combat at the same time.
It certainly comes with practice, just like with anything.
It makes me so happy that not only do you multi-box, but you multi-box with a Falcon. Oh,
I mean, I don't care what
Beautiful.
people say. ECM's like, one, it went through the balance change. Even if it didn't go through the balance change and you still like perma-jammed and couldn't lock, I would have absolutely no remorse for flying a Falcon ult. Because again, I'm in the interest of getting fights, not deterring fights. Like, if I was running around with a Saber and a Falcon ult jamming solo players, like, that would make me a pretty dirty player and in the eyes of a lot of the solo community. So
Speaking of that solo community, like if someone went up to you and was like, "Why do you feel like you can do this?"
why do I feel? I definitely feel that I'm able to do a lot of these things because I have the power of God and anime on my side.
I was
Fucking
waiting
suppose
for
I
love
that
should have
setup.
keyed up when we were chuckling, shouldn't we?
Fucking love it.
So is the Nightmare God or is the Falcon God? Which one's anime? Which one's God?
Oh man, which one's anime? Let's see. I definitely think the Nightmare is the anime. Like the God is the one that's a very ECM's very high control ship. Even using the lexicon of Eve, right, of tournament gameplay, really high control ship ECM. So, and then anime is like you got the afterburner, you're drifting and stuff. So
Plus all the
Nightmare.
spikes.
It's
like, you
shooting
can tell it's
lasers.
the main character.
Lasers do. Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think that the Nightmare is the anime in this context.
You can always tell who the main character is by the spiky hair.
Should we explain the joke to people who don't get it, or should we let them figure it out on their
You
own?
can figure it out on
Let
their
them
own.
figure it out. Yeah.
You figure it out for yourself. All right. Well, in addition to Acer, we actually have to have Auraus's host highlight. I do believe.
Right. So my host highlight was just last night, not even 24 hours ago, with another partner of mine, another CCP partner, 404 HD. We decided to take out a Caracal public fleet, and so we just took out all these Caracals, and we brought some links. I had someone fly a Drake with some special links that gave us an advantage. And we had 3 very fun fights across a span of almost 6 hours. Our first fight was against Goonswarm Federation and Quirius and Brave's home system and P-ZMZ. And after we fought Goons, we fought Northern Coalition as well. And they brought dual prop Osprey Navy issues, which despite losing everyone to, we still came out as positive. But I was just so ecstatic that so many of the participants, all of them, in fact, had an absolute blast. So fighting to the death and Caracals, and it was so much fun. I really enjoyed it. And the second fight was against, oh my goodness, who was it against? The other one I remember was versus Dracaris, a Chinese-speaking alliance. And we fought some Phantasms again, just fighting to the death. It was a super long roam, but shout out to 404 HG's community. And that was my highlight. Was definitely leading that was sort of my first public fleet ever to lead. So it was a very good start. I'm so glad I didn't feed everybody, or I'm glad we got some good results.
Right. Public fleets are not easy. Running them is hard, and finding content is hard.
I think someone made this point to me last night, in fact, and that public fleets are all about the members who join your fleet want to be there, right? It's not something that's required or your members are obligated to, like perhaps if they were in a like a nullsec like block or maybe wormholes or defending something, they're not committed or obligated anyway. So when you have a group of people that are there for their own enjoyment, they're happy to be there. And so there were some times, I think there was probably about an hour throughout the fight we were just taking gates, but people enjoy the company. So I'm glad that the fights were decent enough.
Awesome. Moving into some shoutouts in addition to Acer and Krav. Shout out to our Golden Elite subscribers, Mark Havoc and Kestrel Swainson. Just again, a plug for our Patreon. And I also want to give a very special shout out to Rick Javic's mother. So, absolutely wonderful woman who passed away very recently. If you're not familiar with Rick's, and I imagine many of you listening are, he's an invaluable member of the EVE community. Very active on Twitter, very active in the EVE art scene. Just an all-around great guy. I've met him in person. He's terrific, and our thoughts are with him and his family right now. Andy?
Yeah, my shout out goes to Akbad, City, Delve, and a ton of other guys in Noir. Between power going out and just real life being really busy, I haven't been around as much as I normally am, and everyone in Noir has kind of picked up the banner there and kept running. So I just want to say I appreciate them all.
I want to give a shout out to Extra Squishy for keeping the community updated on all the most important balance changes.
AP?
Nice. My shout out goes to Amelia Dusk Space, a former court member of mine, putting out some really good YouTube content and growing very rapidly. So check him out as well.
Yeah, awesome vids. Actually put out just, I think yesterday, a Fiend video. So if you ever want to see a video with an AT ship being flown, it's a good one.
Ooh, interesting.
We got a link to that YouTube video? We can
I
put
will
in the show
find it.
notes?
Yeah, I will find it.
Awesome.
Yeah, very good. That's it. Go to declarationsboard.com to participate in our show poll. Absolutely crucial scientific poll.
Era sucks. Saber's better.
Eris Master Race. The time is now. We're throwing off the chains.
In Rust we trust.
Yeah, hell yeah, baby.
Unbridled interdictor hedonism. Let's go for it. A final pitch. Noir is recruiting. We can use a few more good mercs. We are trying to build up our fleets to go beyond the less than 10. Well, that's usually what it winds up being. We fielded over 15 earlier this weekend, so I feel pretty good about that. Didn't go super well, which Artemis alluded to. We'll talk about that. Hopefully in the next show, I think, is when our contract will conclude by. Fingers crossed, and we can talk all about it. But it is an absolutely fantastic community. People like Andy, Artemis, myself, all the other folks that you hear about in this podcast, they're members of the NAR community or have been. And this could be a community for you. If you're interested in EVE mercenary gameplay, PvPing as a profession, this is where you should be. Join CafeNor.in-game for more info, including a link to our Discord. And with that, good hunting, listeners.